You and I first met when you were maybe 17 and you were working at UCLA and you're working on exposing the abortion industry. But what made you want to get into exposing the abortion industry in the first place?
Sure. So it wasn't like just a hobby that I got into. It felt like a calling when I was a teenager because I learned about abortion as a young girl. I'm from the Bay Area, California, one of 8 kids and oldest of 5 of them, so the third oldest. And just growing up in that kind of a household, life was very precious, seen as a gift. And then when I found out about abortion, my parents weren't activists, but they were more conservative politically. And I found out about abortion by reading this book that they had in their living room called A Handbook on Abortion by Dr. and Mrs. Wilkie, this old kind of 1980s looking book. And they didn't give it to me. I just found it because I was reading every book in the house at the time. I was very into books. And I just came across facts about what was happening with abortion in America, and I saw photos of a child in the first trimester. So it's amazing how quickly a baby grows. I mean, I'm 3rd trimester right now, but first trimester, tiny, but still by 10 weeks, you have newly formed arms, legs, and tiny newly formed little face. The heart's beating after 3 weeks, brainwaves after 6 weeks. But I saw this image of a child in the first trimester who'd been killed by abortion. And I remember looking at this as a young girl and thinking, what is this? Is this real? Is this happening? I started to do research. I started to ask questions, and I find out that there's 3,000 abortions every day in our country. I start to read up on it. I come across Mother Teresa writing and speaking about it, becomes a hero to me, and she calls abortion the greatest destroyer of peace, because she says, in a nation where a mother can kill her own child, what is left but for you or for I to kill one another? And just absorbing all of this, Ben, I was deeply moved, and I thought, this is the human rights issue of our day. Not a lot of people are talking about it. Not a lot of people are doing stuff about it, but this is the human rights issue, and I have to do something about it. So as a teenager, my resolution was I'm going to try to save some lives by educating other people, because by education, I became aware of the problem. And so that led me to, when I got to UCLA, doing investigative reporting, because I thought, again, I have to educate my fellow students here. There's so much misinformation about abortion. It's not even talked about, and when it is talked about, lies are told about the humanity of the child, the risks of abortion. So the rest was history from there.
So why don't we talk about some of your early research over at UCLA, the kind of undercover stuff that you were doing, because you really did pioneer this space. I mean, you were doing some of this stuff at the same time that James O'Keefe was doing stuff uncovering Acorn. So this is sort of the early days of undercover conservative citizen journalism. So what exactly was it that you were doing?
Sure. So when I got to UCLA, I started a magazine on campus, which was meant to compete with the Daily Bruin, which I wrote a couple op-eds for. I don't know if you ever wrote for them.
I did for a year and a half.
They throw away a few. I kept submitting pro-life articles, and they only had so much appetite for so many, and maybe they published too. But the point was, it was very pro-abortion. The faculty, the administration, as you may remember, it's all very pro-abortion. I mean, you can't find a pro-life professor on campus. They're going to be pushing their politics in the classroom. And a lot of the students, I thought, were actually more open-minded. They just weren't getting any other information. And this was right when social media was just starting. So YouTube had just launched, Facebook. We just had our new UCLA Facebook accounts. And so there was finally a way to get other information out that's not the typical traditional media or the typical, what you're learning in the classroom. And so starting this magazine, I realized I'm going to do independent reporting, because no one's talking about what's happening to pregnant students at UCLA, because girls were getting pregnant. At our health center, there were over 1,000 pregnancy tests that were done in 1 year, in the last reported year, but I never saw a pregnant girl on campus. Why? What's happening to them? And then what's happening with the abortion clinics in Los Angeles? So that opened my mind and my curiosity to say, okay, what can I discover? What can I expose? Maybe just doing my own investigative work. And so my first investigation was actually of our campus health center, the Arthur Ashe Health and Wellness Center, right in the middle of Bruin Walk. And I just went in posing as Lila, saying I was 18, a freshman, which I was, but saying I think I might be pregnant. And the head nurse at UCLA sits me down, and this is the woman that she saw all the students who might be pregnant who were taking pregnancy tests. And she looks me in the eyes and she says point blank, UCLA doesn't support women who are pregnant or help them. And she said, but we have 2 doctors you can see. You can pick which one for 2 different kinds of abortion procedures. And when I asked her about other options, I said, well, what about, are there other options for me besides abortion? She said that adoption would be like giving away a present. She said that being pregnant in class would be embarrassing for me and my fellow classmates because I'd have to use the bathroom. And it was just not worth it. And so I should go the route and get a UCLA doctor to do an abortion on me. So it was very crystal clear immediately why there's no pregnant girls on campus, because despite UCLA being all about your choices and empowerment and women can accomplish anything, we were being told point blank, you should have an abortion.
I mean, that is obviously very stunning stuff. And then you proceeded to go undercover at Planned Parenthood.
Exactly.
Clinics. So why don't you talk about that a
Yeah,
little bit?
so after the health center and reporting on that in my magazine that we launched called Advocate on campus, we also realized, okay, it's time to look at the abortion clinics in Los Angeles, because this is where girls are often being sent, this is where they're going, students are going. And I had done a lot of research and discovered in the practice of abortion, there's a lot of other human rights abuses. So abortion is this ultimate abuse against a child. It's killing a human being in the womb. But it is harmful to the mother, it's harmful to the father, it's harmful to all of our familial bonds, our society. And when abortion clinics are committing these horrific acts against children, they're often not really concerned about the woman either. She becomes a second victim. And I had done research showing how, I had seen research showing how sex abuse victims are often taken, or traffic victims are taken to abortion clinics where the crime that they endured, the assault, the abuse, if they're an underage girl, often it can result in a pregnancy, and then they're taken to this abortion clinic. It's covered up by the clinic instead of the abortion facility reporting it to authorities that they're the way they're required to do by law. And so I came across a study done by Mark Crutcher, this group called Life Dynamics out of Texas, this kind of older guard pro-life group, but they called over 800 Planned Parenthood facilities and found that in over 90% of them, they had a girl posing as an underage girl on the phone, 13 years old. In over 90% of 800 Planned Parenthood clinics at the time, they told who they thought was a 13-year-old girl that they had a don't ask, don't tell policy on sex abuse, meaning she could come in. If she was pregnant, the abuser could even take her and the older boyfriend, and they wouldn't do anything about the abuse. And they wouldn't report it, which they're required by law to do in virtually every state. So reading the stories of actual girls who had been through this, and then they later on sued Planned Parenthood, or there were criminal cases, I was very moved by that. I thought, wow, children are being killed and women are being harmed. So is that happening in LA? And so that led me to go undercover posing as an underage girl, saying that I was a victim of abuse, had a much older boyfriend, statutory rape. And instead of reporting it, in the first 2 Los Angeles Planned Parenthood clinics I went into, both of them told me that I could lie about my age in the paperwork, they wouldn't report it, and they offered to give me a secret abortion. That immediately, 2 for 2, I realized this is not just Los Angeles. This is not just bad stuff at UCLA. This is stuff happening all over the country that no one is talking about. And so that inspired that first investigative reporting and then taking it across the country.
I mean, it is pretty astounding how you have uncovered all of this stuff, and sort of like the David Daleiden case, there have been so many cases where Planned Parenthood has been exposed, and the media have a vested interest in ensuring that people do not hear about the abuses that take place at places like Planned Parenthood. How do you think the media are able to get away with what really does amount to a fairly large-scale cover-up?
Well, I mean, it's no surprise that the trust in the media is at an all-time low. People don't think the media is trustworthy anymore because they're not reporting stories that matter, or they're actually covering for abusers or for people that, or companies or organizations that align with their political ideology, like Planned Parenthood, like an abortion industry, but are actually doing horrific things on the daily and breaking the law. I mean, not just killing children and killing thousands of children a day, but lying to women, manipulating, breaking state laws, covering up sexual abuse. I mean, so many horrific abuses alongside that abuse of abortion. So, and it's not just media. I mean, as we know, it's tech. Big tech. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook, just donated her $2 million to Planned Parenthood. And you have, LiveAction has over 4 million followers online on social media, but we are dealing daily with all kinds of tech bias. So media bias is bad, but I think people at this point are like, hey, yeah, the media is biased. CNN, MSNBC, whatever, they're biased. But it's even more devious when you have Google making the search results. If you type in abortion risks, there are all these Planned Parenthood articles saying there's no risks to abortion, right? Or you're looking at your social media feed on Facebook or your social media feed on Twitter, and you're not seeing necessarily the facts about what abortion actually is coming from alternate voices. Instead, you're seeing stuff that corroborates or fulfills that idea of pro-abortion ideology, which a lot of the folks in San Francisco and big tech support. So it's a big problem, and it's something that that's why Daily Wire is so great. Fight back, spread a different narrative, because that other pro-abortion narrative is so strong right now.